This podcast is brought to you by WRFL, Radio Free Lexington. Find us online at WRFL.FM. Catch us on your FM radio while you're in Central Kentucky at 88.1 FM all the way to the left. Thank you for listening, and please be sure to subscribe.
Hi, and welcome to From the Woods, Kentucky. I'm Renee Williams, and I'm here with my co-host, Lhotka. Today in studio, we have Billy Thomas, who is an extension forester in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky. It's a pleasure to have you in studio today, Billy.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you all both.
Yeah. We also have a few guests that are joining us remotely as well. So, Billy, do you mind introducing them?
No, I'll be glad to. Today we're going to be talking about maple syrup and maple syrup production in Kentucky, and a very exciting event we have coming up on February 1st, 2020, Kentucky Maple Day. And to talk about it, I've brought in three extra guests. I've got two county extension agents. I have Jeremy Williams from Harlan County and Shad Baker from Letcher County. And also with them, I have Seth Long. Seth is the president of the Kentucky Maple Syrup Association. So hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
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 Hey, glad to have you all with us.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
Glad to be here. Thank you all so much.
The Kentucky Maple Day is a big deal, but, a lot of people may not realize that we actually can produce maple syrup here in Kentucky. And I must be honest with you, gentlemen, there was a time I was a little not sure myself. I've seen the light, and I've seen the maple, and I've tasted it, and it's really good. I'm excited to be working with you all on this. Again, most people probably think about Northeast, New Hampshire, and Vermont when they think about maple syrup, but we can actually produce maple syrup here in Kentucky.
We can, Billy. This is Shad. We had a long history of maple syrup production in Kentucky prior to World War II. And it was mostly because of the lack of availability of sugar. And especially in the mountainous timbered part of the state, there were a lot of folks that produced their own maple syrup. Really, when things ramped up after the war, the rationing was over, people started shifting more to sugar, and that's when it kind of fell out of favor down south. It was a little more marginal for us as far as the production of it. And so I think a lot of the production remained in the Northeast, and people kind of forgot that this was something that their grandparents regularly did.
When I started selling maple syrup off the farm, one of the experiences that I had early on, which was quite surprising to me, were people that were in their mid-80s or older would come up and ask me, "Did you make this maple syrup here?" And I would say yes. And it would, right in front of me, there would be a transformation to a distant time long, long ago with memories that these people had when they were children helping their parents make maple syrup. And they would be transported back to that time and talk about their experience. And it was fascinating because it was not a unique experience. Everyone was doing it up and down these creeks and hollers in the mountains, but they were doing it using old-fashioned technology, boiling over open cast iron pots out in the front yard, collecting it with pails and buckets. And one of the things that's exciting to me is all the technology that's available to us to make maple syrup, kind of connecting a distant memory, using the technology that we have today to make maple syrup into an economic piece, a driver, a section of the economy that can really help Kentuckians, with their agricultural pursuits.
Seth, that's a really interesting point. As an extension forester, I look a lot at the trees that we have here in Kentucky and on landowners' property. And as you all well know, we have quite a few maples here in Kentucky. And in fact, the red maple, which I know we get most of sugar maple as the choice tree, but there's a lot of red maple in Kentucky. And the statistics say that we have more red maples that are 1 inch and greater than any other species in the state. So I guess, is there some potential you see with red maple as well?
Well, I think there's tremendous potential. On our farm where we tap, we're probably about 40% red, 60% sugar maple. But in taste testing and quality, there's no difference between the two. The difference is in the sap and the sugar content. The reds tend to be a little bit lower in that sugar content, so you might need to collect more to make it. But we have an abundance, like you said. When I think of where I'm at, If I take Floyd County as an epicenter and touching the 6 counties surrounding Floyd County, there are, according to your surveys, Billy, there are 6.9 million maple trees, both sugar and reds, 8 inches or larger, ready to tap today.
Wow.
That's a huge amount of trees, a resource that's right here that we're paying taxes on those trees on our properties, but we could turn that into a revenue stream.
That's a really good point,
Yeah.
Seth. And one thing I've always tried to when I talk to landowners a lot, I try to encourage them, especially landowners that are traditional ag producers or farmers, if you will, that to think about their woods as an asset, and that they really should treat that as an asset and manage it as such. And I think you just drive that home with that point.
Billy, to play off what you suggested, in Kentucky, because of the fire suppression, we have favored these maples. And I know if you are in the timber business, the logging business, you kind of view these maples as an annoyance, almost a weed, because they come back so fast and they grow so fast that they dominate in the woods when fire is suppressed. And so we've created the conditions, I guess, for maple syrup. Unwittingly, we didn't mean to, but we've actually favored this.
Yeah, no doubt. Again, thinking back just a few years ago, I would actively kind of prescribe treatments to get rid of maple. But really, it all comes down to the landowner's objectives and what they want to try to accomplish, and certainly taking advantage of the trees that you have on your property as a resource. So, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there listening that probably have a lot of maple on their property.
On our property, I have 55 acres. And I would say at least 20% of it has been mined over the years. Strip mining, some of it's been reclaimed, some of it hasn't been. And what's really fascinating is to look at that property 25 years post-mining and see all the reds that are growing up, and thinking about how I can strategically do some timber stand management to propagate these red maples and things, because they really have come back on these properties that have been disturbed in that way.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. And I am so excited about Kentucky Maple Day coming up on February 1st, 2020. A few years ago, I think you guys took a trip up north to try to learn a little bit. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. What kicked this all off is I ran into a maple syrup producer from Maine. And not every day that a hillbilly from Kentucky meets somebody from Maine. And so it stood out in my mind. And a few years later, we were on a hiking trip over in Virginia, and there's a little community over there that was tapping. They were leasing land off of the Forest Service and tapping it to make maple syrup to fund their local fire department. It was a volunteer fire department. And I started researching this online, and I don't guess I realized that we could do it on a large scale here. And Deborah Hill, a former specialist with UK, had put out a little publication about it. And so it kind of got the wheels turning. And I remembered that gentleman from Maine. And all I could remember was the name of his maple house was Grandpa Joe's. And so I Googled that, found the number, called him. And we have stayed in close contact with Mr. Ben McKinney out of Maine ever since. Ben kind of suggested that, we ought to get a group up to come up and see how this is done. And so Jeremy Williams over in Harlan County was really active in helping put that together. And we took several agents and several producers and made a trip. I guess it was in March that we went to Maine. So it was still covered in snow. In fact, it snowed on us while we were up there, and it was bitter cold. But we had a wonderful trip, and we came away with, I guess, the realization that they had small scale operators, medium scale, all the way up to these enormous commercial folks. And everybody was making money at it. And we thought, well, that low end producer that there's really not a lot of inputs, not a prohibitive amount of inputs that are required to get into it. That's something our people could do. We're not talking about opening a factory or something,
right?
Small scale. And so we brought that information back, and there was talk about a maple school. And it really kind of spread into way more than what we thought it would ever be.
One of the things on that trip that we found out was we went specifically during that Maine Maple Sunday, which was one Sunday out of the year. And it was amazing in these sugar houses that we went to. They were lined with folks trying to get in and out the door. We were able to talk with some folks that they lived in the area. They're around maple syrup on a consistent basis, but they went to these sugar houses just to be able to buy maple and maple products. And I say maple products because this is a value added, something that's value added.
Right.
But they went to those sugar houses specifically that Sunday or the Saturday before to have those, to have that maple product. One of the interesting things is one of the producers that we talked to, majority of the trees that he had tapped and was producing maple syrup from was not even his trees. It belonged to an adjacent landowner, and he had an agreement with the landowner to be able to tap the trees and acquire the sap. So, that bodes well for us because of in Eastern Kentucky, you may have a neighbor that has property or an absentee landowner that has property that allows us to go in and as a producer and maybe to negotiate with them or what have you and just work with them to be able to get, to be able to tap these trees. As a matter of fact, I'm seeing just that here in Harlan County. A couple of producers that are doing just that. They're going to a neighbor's property to be able to acquire that. But the trip to Maine and New Hampshire, as Shad mentioned, was very eye-opening. And so the Maine Maple Sunday, to see what happened and what's taking place up there is unreal. And hopefully that's what will take place here this year in 2020.
So I guess we owe Kentucky Maple Day in some small part, at least, to our predecessors up in Maine. So thank you, Maine, for showing us a way.
And I had a question. I was wondering if you guys could explain how it's made, like kind of from the process, the weather conditions that are needed, how you tap the trees, how you make the syrup once the sap is collected. Can you walk us through that process?
We've actually been tapping today. This is tapping season, really, is in January, mostly here in Kentucky. Some folks go a little earlier, but when you drill the holes, you really got about a month before they start to grow back up. And so you need to try to target the middle of what you anticipate the peak of the sap flow will be. And that is kind of like speculating on the stock market. You don't really know exactly what the weather's going to be. Seth, before the show started, he was mentioning that the weather so far this year has not been very favorable. You really have to have temperatures in the 40s during the day where it warms up a little above freezing, and at night it needs to be down in the 20s, and that's the ideal sap flow season. So it can vary from one year to the next, but most of our producers, I think, are doing it around New Year's. And so that gets them up through Valentine's Day, roughly, before the trees start to shut off. Seth, you want to tell us about how you started in the lines and that kind of thing? And
yeah, when I started tapping and making some maple syrup, we just did it for our own family using cleaned out milk jugs or water jugs strapped to a tree and a tap and a little piece of hose in there. And we would go around and collect every day, 16, 30 gallons. But we were really limited to how much we could collect with that method because the hillside here is so steep, the terrain is rugged, and it's really hard to do any kind of production. And at the Maple School that we had here at the Extension office that Shad and Jeremy put on the first year, it really kind of made a connection with how we could do this commercially, how we could do this and make more than just for ourselves, but to sell it. And we were introduced to a way of collecting the sap using tubing. We've elected to go with a very small tubing system, a 3/16 inch system that essentially fills up with sap on the way down the mountain. My 3/16 lines can be over 1,000 feet long, and it'll fill up with sap. And because it's a closed system, the weight of the sap coming down the mountain in that tube will actually put a vacuum, 27 inches of vacuum onto that line, which helps me get about 300% more sap production. With that, putting those things together, we're able to plan and to grow and invest. And this year I'm hoping to put 400 taps in trees and Eventually, in the next 4 or 5 years, want to get to 800. That's our goal. So when we tap a tree up on the mountain, I don't touch that sap until it's down into my sugar house at the evaporator, or running through the reverse osmosis filter to condense that sap to make it more sweeter before I boil it. But essentially, when the sap is collected, you don't have a whole lot of time. There's a little bit of sugar in that sap material. It's not a stable material. You have to be processing it as soon as you can. We try to process ours that day or within 24 hours. And by processing it, basically what we need to do is boil down that liquid to take the water out of it in the form of steam, and the sugars stay behind. Last year, our sap content sugar was 1.6% sugar. At that rate, it took 59 gallons to make a gallon of syrup. So I had to collect 59 gallons of sap to make a gallon of syrup. And we were able to make 38 gallons of finished product last year with those methods. That's a lot of sap coming down the mountain. But it's really amazing how quickly it comes.
We've actually had issues with folks having so much sap coming down. They've been using these international bulk containers to collect the sap at the bottom of the hill. And they've had so much sap flow that it was coming down faster than they could boil it off. And so that kind of pushed us to go a little more high tech and get into this reverse osmosis. And I don't want to scare people, when they're hearing us talk about systems and 3/16 and there's numbers. This is the nearest nothing. I mean, if you see what's involved, all it is a bunch of tubing.
You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky with co-hosts Renee and Laura. We'll be right back after this short break.
Welcome to Wildlife Sounds from the Forest. This is Dr. Matt Springer. I'm an Assistant Extension Professor of Wildlife Management within the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources here at University of Kentucky. I'm here to teach you a little bit about the animals that live in our forests, especially those here in Kentucky. For those of you who might just be joining us, each week we'll play a wildlife sound from our forest. Here's our sound for this week. Stay tuned. Towards the end of the show, we'll talk about this animal and why it is making that sound.
Welcome back to From the Woods, Kentucky. Let's get back to our interview.
So when people hear about the systems, they might be intimidated, but it's not really anything that is complicated. It's a very simple tubing.
Relatively inexpensive. It's not rocket science. You just need to learn a few basic things, and you can be up and running producing syrup to sell.
And you build on it. If you start simple,
yes,
and you want to go to the next level, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. Jeremy actually does all of his on the bucket system.
I think that makes sense, kind of starting small and kind of getting a feel for things and make sure it works. Even when we talk about forest management with landowners, a lot of times landowners get real excited and they want to go treat their entire 100 acres or so. And I'm like, well, let's just start in this small area here and kind of learn as we go a little bit. So yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So what size of tree do you need to start this process?
Minimum of 8 inches in diameter. And there's debate about whether you should use 1 tap or 2 taps or whatever, and that's up to the individual. I think most of our folks have probably gone to the 1 tap model just so that it doesn't stress the tree, and you really don't get a lot of extra sap out of drilling 2 holes unless you have a tree that's really large diameter.
Typically what we're telling people to do in the association is 1 tap, 8 to 18 inches. If you have a tree between 18 and 24, go ahead and do 2. If it's over 24, you can do 3, but never over 3.
Okay. So no matter what size the tree is, it's never over 3.
Right. That's our general rule. How much sap are you going to get out of a tap? I think it's about 15 gallons in a season, 15 gallons of sap per tap. I think it's kind of like a general average here.
Okay.
What does that 15 gallons of sap translate to for syrup that you could put on food?
Yeah.
How does it boil down? What would that boil down to?
So last year, if you remember, I told you that our production rate was 59 to 1, 59 gallons of sap, 1 gallon of finished product.
but that's going to vary depending on where the folks are producing. What we have seen is there's a lot of variability across the region as far as what that sugar concentration is. It can vary during the season. It can vary from day to day. Generally, it will start high early in the season and trail off as it gets further into the spring, but that's just a general rule. We've actually seen it bounce up and down. Our numbers are typically like 1.8. We have had it as high as 2.3, but ours has never gone above 2.3. I know we had some folks at the Maple School that said that they had theirs go up close to 3. And 2 to 3 is the range of most commercial maple operations. And it's not that you can't do it if it's lower. It's just that you have to cook it longer because it's weaker. And when this comes out of the tree, it just looks like water. It's totally clear. It's kind of shocking to people. They think it's going to be brown. And it's clear like water. And as you cook it, if you don't have a reverse osmosis machine, it can take 7-8 hours to cook a good batch of sap down into the syrup. And they measure this in bricks, which is basically the percentage of sugar. So we usually start off at around 2 to 3, and it can take like an hour to go from a 1 to a 2. And maybe another 55 minutes to go from a 2 to a 3. So the time it takes to go up one brick kind of accelerates as you go. So after you get up around 15, it really starts to go quickly.
And how do you measure that?
You can do it with a little cheap hydrometer, which is like a little bobber, looks like a little thermometer in a way that bobs in the sap, and there's a little gauge on it. And based on the density of the sap, it adjusts the level that thing, how deep it goes in the sap, and it will tell you what it is. We've kind of gone high tech, and we've got a digital one now. So as soon as we put it in there, it will tell us to the 10th. So I know that we just took some sap off that was 1.2. But you're trying to get to 67 is legally syrup. But most folks, I think, are taking theirs off around 68.
Okay. Yeah, another way to test the basic rule that we use is to go 7.5 degrees above the boiling point of water. So we're measuring the temperature, keeping an eye on it generally from there, and then after that we're using a refractometer to get it, spot on.
So if the day that you boil, using what Seth just told you, if you boil some water first and you find out what that temperature is, if you put a thermometer in there when it's boiling, when it just starts to boil, then when you cook and you record what that temperature is, when you boil your sap, when it is at 7 degrees hotter than whatever that water was originally, that's when it's syrup, if that makes sense.
Do you have to add anything else to it?
No, nothing.
A curious question. Does our maple syrup taste different than maple syrup like up in Northeast or something, or is it all kind of the same?
Yeah, I think it's similar, but it's better.
Of course, it's from Kentucky, so it has to be.
Right. We joke that it's like the people that down south, things are kind of mellow and smooth, and it does seem to have a smoother flavor. And the sap from up north, in my opinion, it's got kind of a kick to it. And I say it's kind of edgy. It's got sharp elbows like the people. But we've heard it said that it's got more of a buttery flavor down here.
A smooth, buttery texture to it. And I'm a believer that food and place are important, and foods from different places will taste different. I've had people come through our market and have a sample of ours from Maine and from Vermont and Northeast, and they're just blown away by how much they like our syrup. And it is a bit different, but not in any way that's not pleasant.
Okay, that's really interesting. And you brought on a good point too. There's a big movement now being local and being regional in our food sourcing and stuff like this. So this certainly plays right into that. It'd be much better to be buying Kentucky maple syrup than having to transport maple syrup from many states away. So
absolutely. And the maple syrup industry the demand for the product in America has grown 200% since 2010. Part of that has been related to the local food movement, as you mentioned. Some of it has been related to like corn syrup and people realizing how unhealthy some of these sugars are. And maple syrup has a lot of health benefits to it in the way of antioxidants and minerals that you get with the sugar. So there's a lot of benefits to eating local sugars right here from Kentucky.
Yeah. And it's amazing to go from sap to syrup, but it's a really kind of unadulterated product in a lot of ways. There's not nothing's added to it. It's not overly processed or anything like that. So it certainly seems like it'd be a healthier product for sure.
Yeah. Think about the capillary action of the sap coming up through the tree as a filter and how pure that is. I mean, it's purified by the tree itself, and then it's boiled down and condensed. And nothing added to it. Yeah, it's about as pure of a product as you can get, I believe.
You mentioned products, and what kind of maple syrup products are out there, and how many?
Like other than just syrup, right?
Just syrup. Are there other things?
We do cotton candy here that is made from the maple sugar. We do the hard candy, which I'm a chocoholic.
Aren't we all?
I was telling somebody earlier today that chocolate was like in a different universe than everything else. And I'm a big fan of dark chocolate. And I've never had anything that was even close to that good for me personally. But when we had some of Ben's maple candy, and all they do is they take that syrup and I think they heat it to like 243 or somewhere thereabouts, and start to stir it until it starts to crystallize. It starts to thicken, and they pour it into a mold, a little silicone mold that's shaped like maple leaves, and it hardens. That is the best. I just love it. They do that. They do the candied nuts, pecans, almonds, cashews, walnuts. Seth's daughter does some tremendous things.
Through our maple syrup activities, we are inspired to build a permitted commercial kitchen on our farm and have a bakery on our farm. And maple syrup is one of the main ingredients that we use as a sweetener in our baked goods, and we advertise it as such.
Well, I mean, I realize that you can tap any tree. All trees have some sugar, I guess, in them. But I've heard there's a few other species that are being tapped out there. Do you all have much information on that or knowledge of?
We've got a neighboring county where the ag agent over there has folks doing it with sycamore, walnut. I believe they've got some hickory that they're using. In anything in the maple family, so box elder makes a really fine syrup. I would have thought that it would have tasted funky, kind of like the tree smells when you break a branch, but the syrup from it is tremendous.
You can do it with the birch. We have a lot of sweet birch.
Yeah.
Actually, the hornbeam, ironwood, you can make it out of that too. I haven't done that, but yeah.
Do they still call it maple syrup
I
at
guess
that point, or is it walnut syrup?
Yeah, I guess it changed.
I've had the birch up in Alaska. They do the birch commercially, and I had a friend bring some back, and it's kind of reminiscent of sorghum. It tastes a lot more like sorghum.
So it was just interesting. Somebody had mentioned there were some other species, but certainly, maple is kind of the king when it comes to the syrup we're talking about here. So, I was interested too about the association, Seth. You all started this a few years ago, the Kentucky Maple Syrup Association. I think it's really exciting. I know Jeremy and Shad have been heavily involved with it. But would you tell us a little bit about the association, kind of how it came about and what you all are working on?
The association, the Kentucky Maple Syrup Association, was born directly out of the maple school, Kentucky Virginia Maple School, that Shad and Jeremy put on the first year. And what that did is put people together in the same room, some of whom were already making maple syrup, but all of us thought that we were the only ones making maple syrup in the state of Kentucky. So it kind of put like-minded people together that were with some experience. And we got together and wanted to be able to work together to help put Kentucky syrup on the map in the state of Kentucky. And we do that in several different ways. One is to help grow producers, awareness. We want people to be aware that this is a thing. This is something that can be done on a farm here in Kentucky. So we want to teach people how to make maple syrup here in the state of Kentucky. But we want to do anything that we can to promote also the sale of maple syrup here. We don't have a lot of people doing it right now. I think in our membership, we have about 24 paid members that are producing maple syrup at one level or another, but there are room for so many more people to be doing this. One of our small wins that we've had working together with Extension and through the association and talking to people was just to get maple syrup as a judged item at the state fair this year in Louisville. That was a big deal to us because it's like, they actually recognize this as a Kentucky product. And so we were really happy to have it at the state fair this year. And of course, this Kentucky Maple Day here, February 1st, is another one of our goals. It'll help bring people out onto our farms to see how we're doing this and to raise awareness so that people understand that this is a product of Kentucky.
It's so impressive what you all have been able to build in a short period of time, and I'm just excited for what's going on with maple syrup here in the state and your all's assistance to producers. Along those lines, here at the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky, we've been working with the Maple Syrup Association and some other producers, as well as the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and we were able to secure a couple of grants to work on basically maple syrup production and economics here in the state. So I just wanted to mention real quick that we've got 2 projects that are ongoing. One of them is looking at basically the management of the forest for maple production, how we go about that. And Dr. John Lhotka is leading that research. And the other one is being led by Dr. Thomas Ochudo, who is looking at the economics of it, how to make it, economically efficient, make it a viable enterprise. So I just want to mention that. And also, if there's any listeners out there that are maple syrup producers, we are actively looking for maple syrup producers to participate in this research. We need to get real data from Kentucky producers so that we can come up with real recommendations that would be applicable here in Kentucky. So much of the research has been done in Northeast. And, as y'all mentioned, things are a little different here in Kentucky. So we're hoping that this research that we're involved with, that includes the Kentucky Maple Syrup Association, will help set up some guidelines and help assist potential producers and making those decisions about how they're going to manage or get into the business. So I just wanted to thank the association here publicly for your all's involvement in that research. So Seth and Jeremy and Shad, thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great working with the university, and we really appreciate your support and belief in the idea that we can do this here in Kentucky.
You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky with co-hosts Renee and Laura. We'll be right back after this short break.
Welcome back to From the Woods, Kentucky. Let's get back to our interview. So if people listening to the show and they're interested and they want to get started, what should be their first step, or where do they go next to learn more or get more information on this?
I would suggest calling their county extension agent, finding out what kind of information they offer, and then they can funnel them to whatever in whatever direction they need to be. Somebody who's getting started in it. We've talked a lot commercially, but there's also somebody who may be out there. We've talked a lot of great commercial stuff, some awesome things that are going on across the state, but there's some folks out there that may only have 5 or 10 trees in their backyard, and they could still go out there and tap those. I had a producer 2 years ago said they had 3 trees and they tapped them, and they have 2 kids, and they had a great time just tapping and evaporating the sap to make the syrup. So that's available as well. So getting them started at ground one. And also you may have somebody that's already there that's been doing that a few years that wants to jump on the bandwagon and go to the tubing like we've discussed, or the RO, and but just directing them to the going to see your county extension agent.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have some and you just have, like you said, 3 trees, and can you actually cook this on your stove, or how does this work if you need to cook the syrup down yourself?
I wouldn't recommend cooking it inside.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons. If you're married, there's a good chance that your wife is going to throw you out. So definitely do this outside. It can be done over you can go to a makeshift stove. You can use a grill. You could use a turkey fryer. But this can be done on a small scale for somebody who only has 3 or 4 trees, and that's what typically happens.
Yeah, I think I'll just echo real quick. I had a similar experience where I was boiling some peanuts in the house, some green peanuts, and I didn't realize what I got into, and neither did my wife. And so I can appreciate what you're talking about, Jeremy. We filled the house with a lot of moisture and a lot of peanut smell. So,
Billy, this will actually leave a sticky residue. A little bit of it will evaporate, and so it'll end up on your walls. And our buddy Ben says that many a divorce has happened in Maine.
Over making maple syrup.
So that's like a public service announcement.
Right.
Do not boil it down in your house.
Right.
Okay,
That's it. Yeah.
Excellent. We mentioned earlier that we've got coming up this great event here in the state, and I want to talk a little bit about that if we could. This is going to be the very first Kentucky Maple Day, and that's coming up on February 1st, 2020. I know we put together a little website and some information about all of the different producers that are out there, but if y'all tell the listeners a little bit about Kentucky Maple Day and how they can participate.
The Kentucky Maple Day is, I believe, made up about 20 plus producers all across the state whom are opening up their farms for the public to come to see, to talk, to discuss, and to learn more about how maple syrup is made here in Kentucky. I don't know what everyone will be doing on their farms, but I know that on our farm, we'll have the evaporator fired up. If there's no sap flow that day, we'll have water in there producing steam. But we're going to show people how we make maple syrup on our farm. And we'll be giving some tours of the sugar bush and showing how our systems work. For us, it's going to basically be a day of an awareness, and there'll be baked goods and different things available as well. So we're hoping this is kind of like the Bourbon Trail type of thing, where these spots on the map, these farms are opened up, and maybe there'll be time to hit 1, 2, or 3 of them and see how different people are making maple syrup.
That's actually what we saw when we went to Maine, was folks weren't just going to one sugar house. They were trying to hit as many of them as they could. And different sugar houses had different things that they would have available for sale. So here at the Extension office, we're actually going to be doing the pancake breakfast that we do every year, but we're changing the date to coincide with this Maple Day. And so we'll also offer tours of our sugar bush, but we'll have maple candy, maple nuts, maple cotton candy, and of course the pancake breakfast, and then maple syrup for sale.
Why don't you tell us what extension office that's going to be at?
It'll be at the Letcher County Extension Service in Whitesburg. Our Seth's operation is 4 miles away, so if you came in this general area, you'd be able to hit at least 2, and Jeremy may have some over in Harlan.
Hartlove Farms near Harlan should be an hour away from Whitesburg or less. It's going to be open as well. That allows you to see a smaller operation, right. Kind of a backyard type operation that's in the process of expanding.
So lots of opportunities for the listeners to get out. And, it's a Saturday, so it's not only just for the grown-ups, but this is really a family event. So I want to encourage all of the listeners to get with their family and get on our website at www.ukforestry.org. And we have a link on our homepage to where you can find a map of all the farms, the maple syrup farms that are opening up their operations on Saturday, February 1st, 2020. So please check that out.
Sounds like if you only have a couple of trees, or if you have a whole grove full, you can see something at one of these events.
Certainly. And and this is an event, we hope that'll be an ongoing event going forward, and hopefully next year we have even more producers that are participating in this.
Yeah, we'll post a link on our website as well where they can get more information.
I would remind people or instruct people, if they're going to be coming out to these farms, to dress like you're going out to a farm too, because you're going outdoors at a very wet, muddy time of the year. So wear your boots, come on out and plan to spend some time and talk to folks. We'd love to see people.
All right. Good advice.
Well, y'all have presented us with a lot of great information today, and just kind of want to close the show and see if there's any 1 or 2 takeaway items that you want to leave our listeners with.
My takeaway would be that anybody can do this. It's one of the rare things that you can do, whether you have a background in agriculture or not. This would be a great thing for somebody to get into. If they're a UK fan and they're listening, This is a great thing to do during basketball season because you can sit by the fire while you're doing your syrup and listening to the cats play. So it's a perfect thing for Kentucky.
One of my takeaways in learning about maple syrup here is just thinking about economic development, using those resources that we already have that are latent, that are just sitting there, not being used, or they're underutilized. So this Kentucky maple syrup is a great way to put those resources to work and to make it a part of the economy. Especially my heart's here in the coal fields, and I want to see the economy move forward. And I think this isn't the magic bullet or the solution that'll fix everything. But I do think it's kind of like a shotgun approach. You have these silver BBs, not one magic bullet, but you have all these pellets going out. And I think that maple syrup production is one of these BBs that could be utilized to move forward the economy in Eastern Kentucky.
One of the things that I think we found out is it's a community development tool. Once you start that evaporator and you begin evaporating that day, the neighbors will start showing up. Mm-hmm. On a personal note, my mailman showed up three times in one day. Once with the mail, twice to find out what was going on. We'll have people to start showing up, gathering up, and so it turns into an event all in its own of people just sitting around talking. And I've seen that happen on more than one occasion.
Those are some great takeaways, guys,
right.
Really.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it. And if you'd like more information on what you've heard on today's show, visit our website at www.fromthewoodsky.org. Stay tuned now for Wildlife Sounds from the Forest. You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky with co-hosts Renee and Laura. We'll be right back after this short break.
Welcome back to Wildlife Sounds from the Forest. I'm Dr. Matt Springer, Assistant Extension Wildlife Professor in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. Before I tell you what that sound was you heard at the beginning of the show, let's play it again for you.
Kind of sounded like a laugh.
It does a little bit,
even though I know that's not what it is.
No, so this is a call from a white-breasted nuthatch.
Okay.
So that's a relatively small bird. It's pretty common in a lot of folks' backyards. It comes to bird feeders. Basically, like its name says, it's a bird that has a very white-colored front to it, and it has a nice black hat on its head. And these guys, you'll see them, the unique part of this species and the nuthatches is these are the birds that land on the tree and face down. They look down.
They look down the tree.
They look down at the ground. They don't ever land and look up. So when they perch, they tend to grab the bark and they'll face the ground. And they'll walk down the tree that way too. Their claws on their feet allow them to do that.
Okay, and what are they walking down the tree for?
These guys, so their diet primarily is bugs and larvae. But they'll also eat seeds, which is why we see them at feeders and corn and whatnot. But what they're do is, and they don't always do this while they're feeding, but they'll actually walk on the tree trunk and they're going and looking inside the bark crevices for those bugs. Or what they also do is they'll actually cache food in some of those crevices haphazardly in their territory. So they may be looking for some of the food they stored from earlier when their food was abundant.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
So they'll go up or down doing that, but they almost always are going to start by facing down before they go
fly
anywhere.
to the top of the tree and then
Not
go down.
necessarily. It's the top of the tree, and we're going to talk about a different bird a little bit later that does runs, basically goes from the top to the bottom and top to the bottom. Nuthatches will land on all parts of the tree and as they're doing that, but usually they land upside down, right? So facing down.
Yeah. Okay, it's typical size.
So these guys are one of the bigger nuthatches. They're going to be roughly 5 to 5.5 inches in size, which is enormous, right?
Right.
But in the bird world, for the nuthatch world, that's a pretty big nuthatch for us.
Okay.
They're going to weigh about half an ounce to an ounce.
Oh, goodness.
And their wingspan somewhere around 8 to 10 inches or so.
Uh-huh.
So they're what we would call sparrow-sized bird. They're tiny, and if you know what we're talking about, you know that they're about the size of a sparrow. When they're on the bird feeder, they're tiny.
Right.
So they're tiny birds.
I'm assuming they build nests.
These guys do. They will build a nest, and they nest basically once a year, and they'll have somewhere around 5 to 9 eggs. It takes them about 14 days to hatch, and then after hatching, about 26 days in the nest, and then they're gone.
Okay.
And out.
How often do they do that per year?
Once a year.
Just once?
Yeah, just
okay.
once a year. So they're one of the species that only have one brood.
Okay, so then what do they nest in?
So these guys actually, they nest in cavities, and you can actually make a birdhouse like we do for bluebirds that will work for nuthatches.
Okay.
And we have plans within Extension to get that, and there's also plans on the internet. And you can actually create your own little nuthatch nest box if you like to see them around more. If you love them, they're a pretty bird to look at. So. For the most part, they can't really cause you any problems, so they're nice to have around.
I'm assuming it's pretty small.
It is. They're tiny. Even though they're the big nuthatch, it's still a tiny little bird.
Yeah. So do you just clean it out every year,
Yep,
and then a new one might come?
Correct. So you do the same things that you do with most birdhouses, where that care and the winter care is clean that out, bleach it, make sure you try to get rid of all the potential parasites, diseases that are in there, and you can't put it up right when birds start nesting. You need to get up pretty early so that they can find it during migration to use it. So they're actually looking for nest sites as they're coming through areas. So you'd want to have it up late winter, early spring.
Okay.
And these guys are year-round residents for us. Our other nuthatch, the red-breasted nuthatch, is not. They are here now, but come spring and summer, they go north, and they actually breed in the north. Canada, northern parts of the United States as well.
Okay. So anything else besides bugs that they eat?
Well, they will eat small seeds, which is why they come. So they also will go to like the soot feeders, the peanut butter and all that. They'll eat all of those things, and sometimes corn. But they are capable of eating, acorns, small acorns, berries. So a pretty diverse diet as a bird goes.
All right. Well, thanks for coming and talking
no
about
problem.
Thank you for joining us today. If you'd like more information on what you've heard on this segment of today's show, visit our website at www.fromthewoodsky.org.
Hey there. If you're enjoying this podcast from WRFL Lexington, you may enjoy our live radio stream at WRFL.FM and, of course, via radio at 88.1 FM in the Central Kentucky area. We have a wide variety of programs you're sure to enjoy. Just go to WRFL.FM/schedule and see what programs appeal most to you. Thanks again for listening to this podcast from WRFL Lexington.